Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is June 27th, 2025, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So, I have some good news to share with you guys with regards to Russia, and then we'll go over the map and the latest updates and changes on the front line. So, the first good news, and I've already shared that on YouTube community today, is that the Russians, based on what was said by the Ukrainian forces today, have lost 4 Su-34 jet fighter bombers. So this happened in the airbase in Volgograd, in the Marinovka airbase. And I remember this airbase because last year the Ukrainians also successfully struck this airbase, and they also managed to damage a few Su-34s with long-range UAVs. And they also, I believe, destroyed facility that was storing glide bombs. So they are utilizing this airfield to drop the AFB glide bombs on Ukrainian positions. So this is a very important airbase, and it's been confirmed by the Ukrainians that they were able to damage or destroy 4 of them. And this is reinforced by the fact that the pro-Russian Telegram channel, Fighter Bomber, did confirm that something occurred in this airfield. He didn't mention the details of how many jet fighters were destroyed, but this does confirm and align with the statements by the Ukrainian forces that something big happened on this airfield. And again, the Russians have limited manufacturing capabilities, especially with the jet fighters and planes. They have a lot of difficulty building them efficiently. A lot of these components they have to outsource, they have to purchase outside of Russia because they simply don't build these components, these chips, electronic guidance systems, etc. So again, the more they lose, the harder it is for Russia to replace them and rebuild these new jet fighters that cost likely tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So a big loss for the Russians, and let's hope that it was more than 4. But you know, if it is 4, it is 4. It's still very, very good development. Additionally, another good news I want to share with you guys, and that's more related to the map changes, is in Sumy. We've already talked about it for the last few weeks. The Russians, since taking the majority of Kursk back, they started their push in Sumy. And so this was an area of concern because they were starting to have a little bit of momentum, and they started pushing, and there was a worry that they could get as close as to Sumy. And then that would be very, very catastrophic for Ukraine because, of course, the Russian strategy is just destroying cities, right? It's using artillery, bombs, FPV drones. And so Ukraine, thankfully, confirms today, many Ukrainian soldiers and General Syrskyi confirmed yesterday that the situation has been stabilized in this region. This is also confirmed by the fact that the Ukrainians were able to counterattack in this sector in Andriivka and take it back and drive back the Russians to positions closer to Russia. Also, the Russians are complaining in this sector that they were having massive losses. Their main strategy here is using foot soldiers or soldiers driving on motorbikes. And in these open fields, it's very difficult to not get noticed. So the Ukrainians are doing a really good job hunting down these small squads of Russians trying to penetrate. So it's very bloody for the Russians. They've had massive losses, and they've also been complaining that, especially in the north of Ukraine, here in Sumy, Kursk, Bryansk, the Ukrainians are flying their F-16s and dropping these JDAM bombs very efficiently, destroying the deep logistics in Russia. I've seen quite a lot of footage of Ukrainians hitting, bases, bridges, roads that are connecting, villages in Russia with these bombs, and they're very, very destructive and precise. So the Russians have been complaining that there is absolutely no air defense here, and so Ukraine is flying very at ease right now. So that is definitely helped the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation. So this is kind of a similar situation to Kharkiv last year in May of 2024, where the Russians launched this offensive. It looked like they had a lot of momentum, and then they were stopped eventually by the Ukrainians. So I think that's going to be similar. The Ukrainians are going to drive the Russians back a little bit, but there's still going to be a small buffer zone, kind of no man's land between Russia and Ukraine, where there's going to be a lot of fighting ongoing. But that's good news that it seems like the Russians their momentum has died down in this sector. So the last update I want to give you guys on the front line is, of course, we have to talk about the south of Ukraine in Pokrovsk, Velika Novosilka, Chasiv Yar, Konstantinivka. This is really the sector that is very difficult for Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Russians continue to maintain momentum here. Although there's no massive gains by the Russians, they continue slowly gaining ground week by week. Very limited gains, but again, Ukraine needs to stabilize the situation here to force the Russians into peace talks, right? Because if the Russians continue gaining a little bit of ground, they still have that hope and that optimism that things are going well, so they can continue. And they can, of course, allow themselves to have massive losses because their manpower advantage is much higher compared to Ukraine. And we know that they have efficiently adopted a strategy that is very functional for the Russians of just wasting away, thousands of soldiers, but they still keep gaining ground by utilizing that strategy. So the situation here is quite difficult. I've already mentioned this last week, but between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, Chasiv Yar, you can see in the center here that the Russians are really pushing hard. Very limited gains in the past week. You can see that basically the only sector they were able to gain ground is here and a little bit around Toretsk. But they continue slowly pushing through. Additionally, around Velika Novosilka, you can see that it's more symbolic for the Russians. They really want to get through the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk, right? They really want to claim that they've entered Dnipropetrovsk. But even then, even if they were to do that, it's basically not even 0.1% of the territory. So it would take them decades to get to Dnipro and other large Ukrainian cities. It's just not going to happen, but Ukraine needs to absolutely stabilize the situation. And Syrskyi mentioned, I believe yesterday, that the Russians have concentrated between Chasiv Yar all the way up to throughout the Zaporizhzhia front line about 110,000 men, Russian soldiers, basically. So they have a lot of troops concentrated here. And so you can imagine how difficult it is for the Ukrainians to defend this massive front line. And again, remember that these are all open fields. There's no real natural barriers here. There's no forests or massive river systems and lakes. It's all open fields. And so it's very difficult to defend or even attack, right? The Russians simply have adopted a strategy. We don't care about our losses. It's a one-way ticket for everybody. So of course they can't allow themselves to adopt that strategy, but Ukraine can do the same. So it's very difficult. But what is very, I think, good is that the last 2 weeks since the St. Petersburg Economic Forum occurred, where we saw a lot of top officials kind of sounding the alarm that the Russian economy is not doing well, and even admitting that a recession was about to happen, right, if it's not already there. And Putin claiming that we cannot allow a recession to occur. So there is an understanding that the Russian economy right now is really, really dire. Unfortunately, it's still not at the level where it's going to implode internally and collapse completely, because unfortunately, again, Trump is allowing the Russians to have breathing room. He hasn't imposed the sanctions necessary to really choke the Russian economy. Even the European Union has been very soft because of the United States. And Trump has just bought Putin time. I think that if it wasn't for Trump, and there would have been another president that would have been decisive and would have taken a very hard stance against Russia, at this stage, Russia would have been forced to enter peace talks, and Putin would not have had the choice but to actually start, the process of stopping for at least a little bit. But unfortunately, he was able to buy time because Trump is just not decisive enough on Russia and is not providing any assistance to Ukraine yet. That's my last remarks. I've mentioned this yesterday on YouTube community that I do believe eventually Trump is going to take the right decision, meaning he's going to take a more pro-Ukraine stance. It's inevitable because of the reasons I gave to you guys. Russia's not interested in peace talks. Their goal is the obliteration of Ukraine, a complete erase. They want to completely erase Ukraine, and they're not going to stop, right? And so they're just imitating the process of negotiations, meeting with the American delegation, meeting with the Ukraine delegation. But at the end of the day, nothing constructive comes out of that. So they can't keep doing that for months, if not years. It's just not going to work out. And Trump eventually is going to lose face. Additionally, Russia's not interested in any deal with the United States because China is the boss. China is calling the shots here. And Russia will never sign any deal with the United States because they have this alignment with China, and the US is hoping that they can break up this partnership, but that's just not going to happen when China depends so much on Beijing. And furthermore, of course, the majority of Americans support Ukraine. They want to continue supporting Ukraine. And so that pressure is going to increase in the White House, in the Trump administration. And they're not going to be able to continue with the stance of, we'll see what happens. We don't know for another year. At least that's my opinion. So all this to say that eventually I do believe that Trump is going to side with Ukraine, perhaps sell some air defense systems. He's still not going to be decisive enough, but I still believe that Trump doesn't have the choice, right? Eventually he'll have to give in and start putting pressure on Russia because they're not playing fair game. And as I've said as well, that doesn't excuse Trump, right? Even if he makes the right decision in a few weeks or months, that still doesn't forgive him for having opted first for the resolution of this conflict, of forcing Ukraine into submitting, into giving up, right? Because they're the weak side, or they're the perceived weak side. That's the scenario that he wanted first. And so he should never be forgiven for that, in my opinion. And, so much blood and tears and pain has been inflicted because of his lack of leadership, his lack of decisiveness. And that's what he's going to be remembered as a very, very undecisive, pathetic, quite frankly, president that, just tried to force Ukraine to force the victim to pay price rather than force the aggressor to pay the price. So that's the update for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about any of the topics I covered, about the successful Ukrainian operation in Marinovka Air Base in Russia, about the Sumy situation, the Ukrainian forces stabilizing the situation there in the north. Of course, Donbas. So I'm eager to hear your comments. And again, if you guys want to help the Ukrainian forces, please donate to the several drone funds that are available. I have a few links in the description below that you can use to donate. So please do that if you want. With all that, thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!